Okay, welcome back to the, what do we have? Virtuacon 14. Yes, I am Jim McClure, the content director of the GM Academy on Roll20, and we have another presentation for you. And today we're going to be talking about understanding player types, which is really an in-depth discussion. And we're going to be focusing on one specific way to look at different player types, because there are a bunch of different ways to look at it. And what we are going to specifically look at are the 8 kinds of fun. Bet you didn't know that. There's only 8 kinds of fun that you can have within the mechanics of a game. And that's really what we're going to focus on. And we'll get into all that much later. But let's do a little bit of housekeeping here for us. Of course, thank you all to Virtuacon and all the people over at RPG Geek for putting this on for us. Again, this will be a nice hour-long presentation for you. Those following along live, there is the Q&A section. So if you have any questions or need clarification or want to make any comments, of course, you can post your questions there, and I'll be able to see and follow along from there. Lastly, I learned this on the last workshop that I did just a couple hours ago, that there are a few audio glitches that I'm having. So if you hear me get real staticky for a second, it will go away. And I apologize for that. I haven't been able to figure out exactly what it is. But without further ado, we are going to go into understanding player types. The couple things we have to look at right from the get-go is different players enjoy different games for different reasons. One of the big things that we're going to really be focused on, like I mentioned, is the 8 kinds of fun. And in the 8 kinds of fun, we're going to break down and see that within the different types of players, everyone enjoys these same 8 things, but people enjoy it to different levels. For me, for instance, I am heavy narrative, heavy expression. That's the play style that I enjoy. It's not better than anyone else who is perhaps a challenge and discovery play style. It's just a different play style. So I want to get this out right from the beginning. There is not, better or worse play styles from each other. Everyone has their own unique approach and their own unique things that they find fun. So there are differences, but there's no one that's one better than the other. Okay, when we start looking at understanding our players, the other thing I really want to emphasize right from the get-go here is players themselves are the single worst people at telling you what they like. Yes, I'm very, very open with this. For a player to tell you, I like role play or I like combat, they don't understand, and some, maybe those more experienced, those that have DM'd in the past, might know why, but very few really have the deep understanding of why they like role play and why they like combat. A lot of them have just played in campaigns where role play was fun, therefore they go, I want to play in a campaign with role play. But not all role play is created equal. Not all combat is created equal. So what we're going into this conversation to understand is we need to learn how to identify what types of fun our players react to, and that is how we are going to identify and classify and understand our different player types. A lot of people with player types, again, they use the traditional, I'm a role player, I do combat, and in reality, these are just combinations of types of fun. These are not, actual player types. These are symptoms, if I will say, of player types. But players themselves are not very good at all at distinguishing what they enjoy. They just know they have done something in the past and they've enjoyed it and it's been great. And a lot of that has to do with there is a completely different perspective between players and between DMs. Completely different view on how things happen. DMs see it in a sequence of tools, events, fun. We use the tools of the system to generate events that are our play, which result in fun from the players. Players, on the other hand, see we had fun because of these events that were generated by these tools. DMs look at it one way, players look at it from the opposite direction. And the further we have to look, the less clarity we have. DMs have a hard time distinguishing what's going to equal fun. I know what tools I have, I know what events that I can make, and I hope that it turns out fun for the players. Players know when they have fun, they know what events that were used, but don't have a real good grasp on tools, because tools are more than just system mechanics. Tools are how these mechanics are used, and they don't have a good perspective. So there is a big difference in how we look at these different things. And where all of what I'm talking about comes from the perspective to the 8 types of fun, and I want to point this out specifically. There was a paper released, I believe it was in 2001, called MDA, A Formal Approach to Gaming. And this was a paper that was authored by several people, one specifically Mark LeBlanc, who I'll give credit to, who sort of developed this concept of these 8 types of fun, which is what really engage and move players. And that's what we're really going to be talking about here today. So I wanted to start off with a little introduction, understanding that this is what we're doing. Players are really not good understanders of what's occurring. So we as DMs and GMs, our fellow players, need to look and see what the other people at the table are doing, what they're enjoying, so we can diagnose and understand their player type. So without any further ado to that, we are going to get into our first of our 8 types. And this is sensation, is our first of 8 types of fun. And just to give you all the breakdown real quick, the 8 types are sensation, fantasy, narrative, challenge, fellowship, discovery, expression, and submission. And we are going to go through these one. Sensation. Sensation is the tactile feel, the enjoyment of sensory input to the player. What do I mean by that? I mean rolling dice. I mean playing music. I mean the cool map handouts that you give that have that old paper feel to them. That's sensation type of fun. They enjoy being engaged with these different types of sensations. It's not mental. It's something physical that is interacting with them in a physical way. So, of course, some of the big ones within tabletop, there is one that's built into almost every single system, and that's dice. And you know people like this. You have players at the table that really love die, and they buy dice all the time, and they have certain rituals with their dice, and nothing sounds better than dice clacking on a wooden table. Oh, it's awesome. I love it. Likewise, music. So many DMs use music to such great effect because it is such a powerful tool. It sets a scene. It sets a setting. It is a sensational input. It is sensational enjoyment that the players are receiving from rolling dice, from having music played, the handouts, doing the maps, miniatures, people who play 4th edition, people who play war games. They really enjoy having, or some of them I should say, really enjoy having the miniatures, that side of it. I know people that spend hours upon hours upon hours painting and working and crafting their own miniatures because they love it. They love to use it. They love the feel of it. They love to see it. That is sensation type of fun. So when you have a sensation player, what you need to look for is they will dig into anything physical at the table. They love dice, they love maps, music will really get them into a scene. Anything like, that brings that sensation, it will draw them closer into the scene, into the world that you're creating. It will make them more involved and more invested when they get to do that. It tickles that first type of fun we're talking about, sensation. And they're really easy to identify. Again, all of these things will work great. And again, I want to make one other point. Of these 8 types of fun, all 8 of them, every single person enjoys all 8 of these. It's not like I enjoy 3 and hate 2. Everyone enjoys them, just to different levels. Sensation for me ranks somewhere in the middle. It's not on a low end, it's not on a high end. It's somewhere in that middle ground. I love dice, I love music. I don't care that much about handouts or miniatures, but those 2 really I like and really get into them. So I just want to make that point. Sensation players are really easy to distinguish because they love this kind of stuff. Warning, when playing with sensation players, they will get bored without sensory input. They can get bored with theater of the mind type play. So if people do heavy theater of the mind, and we're doing a panel tomorrow on this as well, and they are really engaged with, playing, no maps, nothing like that, no music's being played, it's heavy role play, so there's not much dice. A player that enjoys sensation will start feeling bored and lost if there's nothing given to him because he's not getting that sensation input. If it's one of his primary interests, which again, People are really bad about determining. No one's going to come up to you and go, I'm a sensation player. Well, I might, because I know it. But you will notice that a player that normally loves miniatures and loves rolling dice and loves music, they're suddenly playing theater of the mind and they're bored. Well, it's because their sensation type of fun is not being engaged. So that's our sensation type of fun, and our first one of the 8. The next one that we're going to get into is fantasy type of fun. Now, fantasy type of fun, this is not fantasy the genre, as in you have fantasy, you have sci-fi, you have horror. It has nothing at all to do with that. Fantasy is immersion into the world. Immersion into what is happening in the world and letting the rest of the world fade away. That is fantasy enjoyment. That is the fantasy type of fun, being able to sink into a world and the rest of everything disappears. Now, fantasy is something that ranks very high with a lot of people who play tabletop RPGs. They love to get into the world. They love, I'm not going to say necessarily into character, because that gets borderline expression, and fantasy and expression are sort of brother and sister types of fun, which we'll talk about expression later. But fantasy is the enjoyment of sinking into the world itself and the characters around you, and that level of enjoyment and accepting that this is what's happening in the world. It is total immersion. Now, to identify a fantasy player, what you're really going to look for is a couple things. One, they will stay in character. Fantasy players, and again, like I said, it's brother and sister with sensation that will, or I'm sorry, brother and sister with expression that we'll talk about later. But they will very much stay in character because they want to stay in this world. The other thing is they're going to want a coherent world that they can sink their teeth into and forget about everything else. They want that escapism. Now, the coherent world is a big thing. They need to have a world that makes sense and is regularly consistent. If they have that world, then what they can do is it allows them to get into it. It allows them to stay, within this new world that's theirs. It wasn't what was before. It wasn't the rest of their life. They get to pass by and sink in. If something ends that, if something brings them out of this, then what you have is it breaks that immersion. It breaks that fantasy, and it breaks that type of fun. So when you're looking for fantasy players, you're looking at the ones that stay in the world, and they will be very focused on consistency in the world so that they know it's right. It feels like its own place. Now, there are levels of warning with our fantasy players. Like everyone else, if they like one thing, a lot of times if they don't get it or other things can conflict and step on them. They get annoyed by things that pull them out of character. Metagaming, non-player related conversation, things that don't fit into the world will all pull them out of their fantasy, because everyone should be the character that they're playing. The world should be the way that it is. All of this perpetuates the escapism. But if there is, conversation about work tomorrow, if there is, inside jokes or proverbial, pop culture references, all of this stuff can start pulling the fantasy character out. And you've probably seen these people at your table that they focus when all the conversation goes, they just sort of tone out until we're back in the world. It's because they're trying to keep the fantasy intact. Metagamers very much step on the toes of fantasy players, because when they're acting in a way with meta knowledge, it is not knowledge they would have within that world. It breaks the immersion. The other big thing about fantasy players to understand is they will take a sense of ownership in the world. They will feel like they own a piece of it. A piece of it is them and theirs. And when something happens to the world, something that changes it, it will really affect them, because it's their world, it's their place to escape. So if you do something with the world, understand that a fantasy player, one of these escapism players, they are really going to feel that. You can use this very well and you can use this very poorly, but the best thing you can do as a DM is understand when you have a fantasy type player. And then you understand the ways that you can work your story to affect them. So That's our fantasy player. Once we get past fantasy, then we have our next type, which is narrative. Now, narrative is relatively, I'm going to say relatively straightforward in that it is the enjoyment of the building and resolution of a story. Narrative is the enjoyment of a story. Now, this sounds really straightforward, but it's also one of the big, heavy things that takes a lot of work to get right. And the reason being is because in the modern world that we live in 2014 right now, us as a society, especially tabletop players, have been bombarded with story after story after story their entire life. Between TV shows, between movies, between books, between kids' books growing up, they have heard tons of story. And there's a lot of structure that goes into a story that they don't necessarily understand, but it puts them off when it's missing. And again, I'm not going to go too much into that side of it because the workshop before this, I did an hour on specifically designing a plot that will appeal to a narrative type player. So if you're interested in more of that, you can look at that video. But the big thing is they want a story that builds and then resolves. So the couple things we look for when we're seeing a narrative player. One thing is they're going to want a clear divisive story. I'm sorry, decisive is the word I'm trying to say. Clear, decisive story in that here's where it's not necessarily that's linear, but here's the story, here is the events that happen, and here is the conclusion of it all. They want to see all of that. Whatever the core story that's going on, they're going to attach to it because they want to be part of it. And that's the second thing that you look for in a narrative player. They will want to be part of the story. They don't just want to witness a story. Narrative enjoyment, especially from a tabletop standpoint, comes from being able to interact and influence that story. So narrative players very much will want the clear story. They're going to want to be part of it. They're going to want to decide its outcome or be a part in the decision. They want a finale. Again, I have really hit this on the other episode. If you just have a story that goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and goes and never seems like it's going to end, you start losing the enjoyment of narrative players because there's no finale. There's no story arc. They're happily willing to jump on the train of the next story for a second story arc. But if there is never that finale, there's other problems that just non-narrative players and non-narrative players have with not having a finale. But narrative players especially will feel very disheartened in a game that does not have a finale. So that's what they're going to want to see. The other thing is they're going to want to know about all the side stories and they're going to want to know about all the after plots. These are the people that when the campaign ends, they go, okay, that was great and awesome, but what happened with the baby and woman down the courtyard? I know we're not going to play it, but just tell me what played out with her, you know, when it was all said and done. They're going to want to know all of the little side stories. They're going to want to know all of what happened because it's all story. And they're going to want to fill in all of the holes that exist within the story. Even if they're just side quests that they never, you know, not to say that your story has holes to it, but if there were side quests that were uncompleted, they're going to want to know all this. They're going to ask you about this. That's heavy on the narrative players. Narrative players, of course, with everything, that's what they're interested in. Then we see the other side of the coin of what makes them unhappy. And a narrative player will get very unhappy if the story starts to break down and become convoluted. We start going in 18 different directions. We've had 3 different villains pop up. We start seeing all this stuff, and suddenly the main narrative thrust, what we're here to do, is lost in the mundane of everything else. Suddenly the narrative player lost his fun. And I speak very high of this because when I rate the 8 types of fun, narrative is my personal #1. I am a big narrative player. They want to, and myself, again, speaking from experience, we need a direct story. We need a storyline that we can follow and a storyline that comes to a conclusion. If it all starts breaking down and this plot line never finished, so we went to this, you just start destroying the enjoyment that a narrative player has. Also, long deviations from the main plot. will really stand against narrative players. If the story is, as a narrative player, we are going to the island to rescue the princess, and we've bartered and got the boat, we've crossed the seas, we fought the Hydra, we landed on shore, and we bartered, to get through the pass, we've gone on this huge big journey, and then suddenly we have this prison side quest where we get arrested for some reason and spend 6 play sessions getting out of jail. You just destroyed all of the pacing that the narrative player expects from a story, and they will start losing interest. Yes, you have started a new story, but if it is just a direct side quest that has no bearing on the main story itself, you just ruin that time for the narrative player. They very rarely will have enjoyment out of something that is off of the main storyline. A couple other last things that they're unhappy about is, of course, unresolved plot threads and a lack of a finale. We already talked the finale to death, but unresolved plot threads. If there was something that didn't have a purpose, it didn't have a reason, it just existed to exist, or it never got closure, they're going to want to know about it. They're going to be unhappy if it was just, well, I didn't really have anything for it. Well, then why did it happen? I want a story. I want you as a DM to present me a story, and you aren't presenting me a story. And again, going back to what we said at the beginning, a narrative player, players in general, aren't going to be able to verbalize this to you. They're not going to be able to tell you this to you. You as a GM should be looking for these traits in the players, to look and understand who they are and how they act and why they act this way. So if your campaign just kind of ends and they're like, huh, and then you're like, well, you enjoyed everything up until that point, why wasn't it fun? Oh, well, I don't know. They didn't get a finale, or something was left undone, or the story just broke down. They didn't get a conclusion, which is really big on narrative players. So that is our narrative player. Now we get into challenge players. Now, challenge players are interesting, and I put it next to narrative because often within the world of tabletop, challenge and narrative clash. Not always, but there is a lot of headbutting that can happen between narrative and challenge, as well as expression and challenge. A challenge player is one that gets enjoyment from difficulty. And specifically, they get enjoyment from overcoming difficulty. Doesn't mean that failures are necessarily bad to them, but they want to be able to overcome. They want to fight the odds. They want to be able to, do a lot of the stuff that we very much take as, standard tabletop trope that we would know from games like D&D and Pathfinder. They really want that difficult challenge. And again, in tabletop, most of the time this is coming out in combat scenarios. Now, there's tabletop, obviously, that have other systems that handle, social combat and other things that difficulty can apply to. So it's not just combat. But again, if we look at from a D&D, from a Pathfinder standpoint, most of the time we're looking at is combat, because that is the difficulty to be overcome. What they enjoy, it's really simple. They like overcoming something. They like to win, as it were. And again, I said at the beginning, there's nothing wrong with this behavior. This is a type of fun. It's a legitimate type of fun. It leads to some negative side effects, but every single other type of fun does as well. The difference with the challenge player is, and a couple of things they're saying besides just winning, they don't want to just, okay, we squashed him and won. That doesn't tickle that challenge type of fun. It doesn't make that something special. They want to know that they won because of their carefully crafted actions, because what they did in combat, because of how they built their character, and if they didn't do it to the best of their ability, they would have lost. That is the ultimate fun to the challenge player. That is the thing they enjoy the most, that only because of their intelligence and planning and actions did they overcome and win. And if they wouldn't have done that, they would have lost. That is the ultimate. That's what makes the challenge player play. Now, the negatives that come along with this is challenge players often do meta behavior. They go, okay, my character doesn't know that there's 2 snipers hiding up in the tree, but I see the tokens and we need to win this match, or we need to win this battle, or else we'll die, or whatever the consequences are. So therefore, I'm not going to directly address them, but I'm not going to put myself where I'm in an open line of shot from them. because I need to win. I don't need to win. I want to win. That is the enjoyment that I get. You will very often see meta behavior from challenge type players. The other thing is they will feel bored if there is too much non-action. Again, often challenge players are called, I enjoy combat, although action does not necessarily mean combat. It does mean having a challenge to be overcame. So if there is social interaction, and dice rolling for social interaction, but the only result is how much someone likes or dislikes you, there's nothing to overcome there. If there's a guard at the door that you just, each person turn has to roll till they get above the required diplomacy check, that's not, something to be overcome. There has to be a win-loss condition. There has to be something for them to overcome and do better and defeat and therefore win to have that challenge type of enjoyment. The other thing with challenge players is they can get annoyed if others are not playing to win. And this is frequently where challenge can conflict with narrative and expression, where narrative and expression type players will play to the scene and to make the scene more interesting or to drive the story. The challenge players want to win. And if not everyone's on board with that, suddenly it's just making their life harder. It's making it harder to enjoy their type of fun. So you have to watch out for this behavior, because a lot of times people see what challenge players do as disruptive behavior. They're doing meta. Not everyone's engaged in the combat. They're going, why aren't you moving there into flanking? But you just have to understand this is a type of fun. That is what they enjoy. It's not for any other reason. It's not better or worse than any of the other 8 types. It's just a reason. Some people rate challenge very high. Some people rate challenge very low. It all depends on the person, but you want to definitely identify when you have a challenge player, because they will often, very often run into conflict with narrative and expression types players. So that's our challenge style player, as it were. All right, so we've got challenge, all that. So far we've done, of course, sensation, which sensation is our tactile feel, our music, our dice, everything like that. We have fantasy, which is our immersion into the world and into the system. We have our narrative type of fun, which is the enjoyment of story, and all of the enjoyment comes from story and resolution. And we have our challenge type of player, which gets enjoyment from overcoming difficulty and winning. So from there, we get to the next type, which is fellowship. Now, fellowship is a different one. It's a bit of an oddball. Fellowship is essentially doing something with people. It is the enjoyment you get from doing an activity with other people and the fellowship and fun that you have along with it. Again, I don't like the term fun because there's 8 types of fun, but it is the, just the I'm getting to do something with other people that are also doing something. That's fellowship. It's really simple and straightforward, but it's a powerful concept to understand, because there's a couple key aspects in a tabletop game that you will see from fellowship players. They want the experience of playing a game with other people, but they also want to do it together as a unit. They will very much be against player versus player behavior. They don't like that because it's divisive to the party. It's no longer, us working together to get something done. It's now me versus you. And that's not what fellowship enjoys. They want that party unity, that party cohesion, doing something together to achieve more than what we could have done separate. That's fellowship. That's one of the big things that they will look for. Keeping that party together, everyone working towards a common goal. A couple of things to look out at fellowship players. They will also frequently be the quiet one at the table. They will be the one that sits there, game in and game out, contributes some, maybe not contributes a lot, maybe doesn't contribute as much as other players. But then at the end of every play session, we ask how everyone fun. They go, oh, it was great. It was awesome. And you kind of scratch your head as a DM going, is he just patronizing me or what? The reality is he was here doing something with other people, accomplishing a goal, and that is what he enjoys. He doesn't necessarily, he or she does not necessarily need to be, the star of the show or even directly accomplish anything, as long as they are part of the group and the group is doing something together. Now, what really gets interesting with this is they are they're kind of difficult to read, because some people go, well, if you're going to sit there and not contribute, why are you even here? But they are getting a type of fun just like everyone else is at the table. Their type of fun just doesn't come off as expressive as the other types of fun. Fellowship is its own little thing. So I really like to tell DMs, you know, when you have a player that's at a table and very quiet but still enjoys every single play session, you know, you might be doing everything right. Some players just enjoy that. They're the fellowship player. Enjoyment from doing something with a bunch of people. The one thing you want to look out, though, is a lot of times, because they just doing that and like sitting in the background, a lot of times they will feel very uncomfortable if you start forcing them into the spotlight, forcing them into action. And you've probably seen it. If you've been a DM for long enough, you've seen these types of players that, again, they're there at the table, they're enjoying, you know, you're like, well, I want to get you more involved. So I start throwing, you know, plot hooks and all towards your character's direction. And they suddenly sort of back off and, you know, talk to everyone else and how do we handle this and get someone else in that spotlight role, because they often don't want to be there. They just want to have the fun of enjoying everyone together. That's the fellowship type of fun. So once we get past fellowship, then we hit discovery. Okay, discovery is, while relatively straightforward, a very interesting one. Discovery is the enjoyment of exploring a world, with a big asterisk after that, because discovery players really want to find what other people haven't found. And I'm going to try and explain this term because it's a little complicated. It's not as easy as you know, a straightforward explanation. And I'll give you an example. A discovery player, if our party is marching through the woods and we're going out into the wilderness, you know, going west and let's see what happens, and we go through the woods and then we see this giant stone monolith that goes up to the sky, and we have, you know, discovered it's been untouched for ages. Discovery player does not get enjoyment from that. And I'll tell you why. Because he didn't discover something new. Sure, within the context of the game, he discovered something new. What he discovered, or what he ran across, was something specific that the GM created for this game that we were supposed to find. We were walking through the woods and we found it. I didn't discover anything. Now, if he climbs to the top of that stone monolith and then finds that there are runes on top of that then, of course, mean something, that is engaging his discovery type of fun. He found something within his world. In this case, the world is just the stone monolith that they found that everyone else didn't think about, that the other players didn't think about, the GM probably didn't think about. He went and explored and looked someplace else and found something that the rest of the world hadn't. That is the discovery type of fun. And I really like to emphasize this point, because especially people that like to run big sandbox campaigns, you would think by default you would get this discovery type of fun, but just putting obstacles to be found in an RPG world does not work to itch that discovery type of fun. So when we look at what discovery people like, they do want a fully fleshed out world. They don't want to feel like something was handed to them. They want to feel like they found it themselves. So they want a fleshed out world. They want a consistent world in that regards. Different than our fantasy player that wants to immerse into this world. He just wants to know that the world exists to be explored. And that's what he wants to do. They're going to look in every cave. They're going to look in every building. Often they will wander off from what is supposed to be happening to discover. I know a lot of you GMs out there have had this experience where, you know, you have the party, we're invested in the story, we're all going this direction, and then suddenly one of our players goes, well, I want to go out in the wilderness and search the river, because they're not getting that discovery type of fun. That's what they want to go out and find. And it often comes off as disruptive, but it's actually not, because they are engaged with the game. They are engaged with what's going on. They just need to enjoy their type of fun, which is discovery. If they're not getting to do that, they will seek out and find it. And it looks like disruptive because, like, well, everyone else is going this way. Why are you going that way? Because he's not getting his type of fun. So that's one of the big key things to look for. If they start, deviating off to look at this or talk to this guy or anything like that, they want to see it. They want to be told what they find. And this is actually a very specific point. I mean, that seems pretty obvious, but there is, especially within the modern age of RPG, and we're getting more and different elaborate RPG systems out there, we have really changed the dynamic from the standard D&D and Pathfinder. Clearly, D&D and Pathfinder still exist, and the overwhelming majority of people play this, but there are many other types of games now, and there are certain types of games where there is not a GM, or the GM gives it the power of the players to decide the world. So an example would be if the players enter a cave, instead of the GM describing to them what the cave is like, they go to the players and say, all right, tell me what's in the cave. Perfectly acceptable way to play. Absolutely nothing wrong with that. Plenty of people enjoy it. A discovery player will hate it because they don't want to find what's in their head. That's what an expression player wants. A discovery player wants to see what was in the world. They want to be told what they find. They want to understand that this is a world that they can explore and find pieces of. So that play style, while it works for many, many people, does not work well for discovery players. So that's my point when I say they want to be told what they found. It's sort of specific to the modern era and some of the things that we're seeing in the way new tabletops are being developed. A couple things to look out for with discovery players. One thing is they will get annoyed if you keep them in too small of an area for too long. If you put them in, a small city or a prison scene or something where there's nothing really for them to go out and explore and find, they will often get bored and then they get distracted and start wandering. They need to be able to have that. They need to be able to engage with it. If they can't do that, they will search it out and they will find it. They're discoverers. Ha ha ha. That's how it works. The other thing is they will get very bored if all the areas are the same. If it's just another town square, another bar, another city hall, if it's all the same and very generic, they're not going to get enjoyment out of it. Even if it's not necessarily generic, even if it's, an exotic locale, but yet, it's always flowing gardens, it's always big ponds, it's always fountains. If it's all the same, after a while, the discovery player is going to lose enjoyment of that. He is going to stop getting enjoyment because there's nothing left to discover. He's found it all. So having areas always be the same, is a big concern. And of course, the other thing I talked about this a little bit earlier is they do have a habit of derailing campaigns, but it's not an intentional thing. And that's the big takeaway I want you to have for discovery players. They are not intentionally trying to detract from the game. They are not being a disruptive player. They are trying to engage in their type of fun. And if they're not being allowed or presented opportunity to discover, to have the discovery type of fun, they're going to search it out and it's going to come off as disruptive, but they're legitimately trying to be engaged and focused in the game. So those are the couple big things to look at, again, for discovery type of players. That was discovery. So let's move on now to our, what are we at, 6 or 7? Our 7th type of fun, which is expression. Now, we have talked a fair amount about expression sort of up to this point, and it's to a large degree exactly what you think about. It's the enjoyment of expressing yourself or a part of yourself through gameplay. Now, this is another topic that's a really big one. Expressive players, and again, I am very much an expressive player. My number 1 is narrative, number 2 is expression. They want to be able to get out parts of themselves, even if it's I've played megalomaniac villains before, and again, I don't like saying this under recording, but a part of me, a part of them is in a part of me, and vice versa. It's a small area that I get to express through roleplay, and there are hundreds and thousands and hundreds and thousands of these small areas of psyche that expression players love getting out. And it's not just from playing a character. Often DMs and GMs are expression players because we have stories that we want to tell. We have worlds that we want to tell. We have NPCs that we want to show. We really want to express all of this stuff that is us and all of the stuff that we've created. Very frequently, GMs are expression players. Number one thing to understand. That's, let's say, if I'm identifying expression player, first I'm going to ask you GM or player. I tell me a GM, I think they're an expression player, or at least it ranks pretty high, because it's that whole concept of expressing yourself or a part of yourself. Couple things to look out for expression players is, of course, they will get very much in character. They want to play out this piece of them. That's what they really, really want to do. That's what makes enjoyment. That's what brings fun to the table, is playing out this part of them. So they will get in character. The other thing they will do is, expression players are often the ones that are going to bring out the wacky ideas. You know, this is your cooped out professor inventor that, you know, everyone else is barbarians, and he's talking about crazy balloons that carry people through the sky that he wants to invent. These are your expression players, because they want to see those different things. They're not necessarily as interested in the story. They're not interested in winning. They're not interested in these other types of fun. They're interested in expressing themselves or a piece of themselves through the characters that they play. So you often see the people who create these wacky ideas. Those are the expression characters. The other thing is, they love character interaction above all else. Yes, from a GM standpoint and expression, there's world creation. There's a bunch of other things. From a player standpoint, and still to a large point from a GM standpoint, they love character interaction, because it's how they get to express themselves. It's how they get to play out these traits that they really want to get out in the open. So you will see them, you know, very much involved with characters and talking and role playing and everything like that. Another couple common things with them: detailed backstories. The other guys are going to come to the table and go, here is my 20-page thesis on my character. Please read it. Because they're expressing themselves. They want that fleshed out character. They want to be able to express all of these different things. And that is one way that they do it, through the backstory. Then we start looking at some of the, of course, negative things that expression characters can have. They are very unhappy with forced character action. If a DM tells an expression player, your character does this, or your character thinks this way, or whatever the case may be, they will get very unhappy and very defensive, because it's a piece of them, and they don't want someone else telling that piece of them what they do or what they think. It's really a big thing to them. They will get a lot of pushback from any sort of forced action. Now, you know, if they're fighting guards and they get knocked out and then drugged to prison, you know, that's completely acceptable. But if you tell them, you know, the mother's standing there with their dead child and you feel sad, well, the expression player is going to go, wait a minute. You can't tell me that I feel sad. And again, players are bad expressing themselves. They're not going to tell you this. This is all going to happen in their mind. They're going to go, well, I don't feel sad. I'm a crazy, kooky doctor. I want to experiment on them. I'm not going to feel sad at all. And they will get very defensive in that regards. Do not tell them. And also forced action. If you say, you know, your players, you walk through the street and you missed and you didn't see the rogue hiding behind you. Yeah, if you made a roll, fine. It's all fair play. But if you didn't, if you just told them that they missed something, then they're going to feel upset about it. If you told them they had to go to the dock, if you told them anything like this that forced their character to make an action, an expression player will get very defensive about that. The other thing is, they will take things that happen to their character very personally. This is not necessarily, this can be a good thing, this can be a bad thing, this can be indifferent, but it's a tool to understand as a DM. An expression player is very much going to internalize what you did, because what you did to that character, you did to a piece of them. It's really an important concept to them. And again, I mean, most players are not going to, you know, sit at home and brood all week because, you know, my character lost an arm, but they will take it harder than most. Again, for good or bad result, because it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not always going to be a negative reaction. Frequently, it will be a very positive reaction. But as a DM, you should understand your expression player is going to take it, you know, a lot more personally than most other players. Taking that to its ultimate degree is they will take death of a character very seriously. An expression player does not enjoy dying because of the roll of the dice, because they lost a piece of them for essentially a random mechanic. Now, again, it's not that you should ever avoid death from expression players, but understand it is a very difficult situation for them because a piece of themselves that they are getting to play, they are no longer getting to play. And maybe they're through and done with it. Maybe it's great. Maybe they got some other aspect they want to play. Expression characters will make a lot of different characters, but they will take it very hard. So be aware of your expression players, that they will take death very hard. They will take things that affect their character very personally. These are the things you want to look out for your expression players. Now, we get to our last type of fun, submission. Now, submission kind of has, obviously, an odd name to it, but I want to tell you what submission is. Submission is the enjoyment you get from doing an activity that requires minor mental focus, and essentially you do it as a pastime. So that's a lot of words to describe a simple concept, and that simple concept is Candy Crush. Most of you all are probably familiar, at least heard of Candy Crush. It's a simple little game. You flip some candies around, it explodes, you get points, you do a thing. It takes very little mental effort to do it, but it stimulates something in the brain. It keeps it going. It's a very, big pastime. The other one that I really point out, a game that really defines how many people enjoy submission type of fun, because I will say submission, it's the hardest one to diagnose, especially self-diagnosis. No one ever thinks they have submission enjoyment. They go, no, I like heavy engaged mental brain activity. I love it. I love thinking games. I love all this. And then I go, why is Minecraft one of the best-selling games of all time? Yeah, there's other types of fun. There's certainly discovery fun in there as well. But it's heavy submission fun. It's mining and mining and mining. And again, I myself am very guilty. I have a lot of hours logged into that game, maybe more than Final Fantasy VIII, we'll have to say. But it is a game that is based on engaging submission type of fun. It is in every way, top to bottom, a submission type of fun's perfect game. And it is one of the best-selling video games of all time. There is a massive segment of our population that enjoys submission fun. And very few people will tell you they enjoy submission fun. I personally rate it very lowly on mine. But the submission is an interesting thing. Again, it's something that they like to do. I like to say they like to keep their hands busy, so to speak. They just want to be doing something so that their brain is active and engaged. Now, I personally hold that this type of fun is directly at odds with tabletop roleplay. Because tabletop role play is actively engaging. You're rolling dice, you are making decisions, you're making things happen. Every step of the way requires, more than a baseline level of mental process to do. And a submission player, a submission person who enjoys that is not going to, like this heavy, constant mental engagement. It's a difficult thing for them to do. They don't want to do it. They want this baseline enjoyment. So I hold submission fun is very much at odds with what we at tabletop do. It's not very compatible at all. Yes, there are some attempts tabletops have made to really engage the submission types of fun. Pathfinder has additional rules out for resource management, town building. This kind of stuff is can be used to engage that submission type of fun. But ultimately, the video game experience that we have in 2014 is always going to do it better than we can at tabletop. We've done some. There's a couple systems that have gotten decent at it, but ultimately a tabletop system is a system that has to be ran and upkept by people using brain activity, and that is in conflict with submission. But there are people that will be at your table that do enjoy the submission type of fun. Again, a lot more people than will ever admit it, just because it's hard to self-diagnose. They are people, not unlike the Fellowship, that will seem unmotivated at the game table. They very much will not be engaging with other players, because again, they're not looking for this high level of engagement. They're not looking for anything like that. They are simply here to do something to occupy their brains. So they will be very disinterested, very unengaged with what's happening. And again, it will almost seem like they have no interest, but this is fun to them. It is an enjoyment to them. A lot of times, of course, they can feel overwhelmed. Again, very similar to fellowship players. I like to say submission and fellowship is honestly very, brother and sister, just like a narrative and expression are. But the thing about them is they will feel very overwhelmed when forced to make decisions. Very much all right, I've got to figure out all of what's going on in my character sheet. I got to make decisions so that way I can get back to my baseline mental level. That's what I'm trying to get back to, because that's where I'm having fun. The baseline mental level is where I'm having fun. That's the important thing to take away from this. So they'll feel overwhelmed when they have to be the star, when they have to take direct action, when they have to do anything like that. And again, I'll just say it one more time. Submission is at odds, in my belief, with what we do in tabletop. It is not a good compatibility. It just doesn't work very well. To try and have low-level mental engagement with what is done in traditional tabletop games is very, very difficult. So those are our 8 types of fun. What I really do is sort of, what you look at then is what can you do with this knowledge? And to a degree, and this is going to sound odd at the end of this, I don't have a lot of answers to this, because a lot of times you're going to have to decide yourself what you want to do. I highly encourage you, honestly, when I GM, I get definitions from all my players of what I believe their type of fun is. I look at how they play, I look at what engages them, what doesn't engage them, and that way I know when it comes down to it, all right, when I drop this heavy, narrative bomb on someone, it's going to affect these two, but not as much as him. I have predictable results because I know what types of fun engage them. But one of the dangerous things is deciding what to do with this knowledge, especially from, and I'm going to bring this into a light of establishing a table from the beginning. Again, we are in the 21st century of tabletop gaming. Gaming no longer happens, I'm not saying no longer happens, it used to exclusively happen around tables and with groups of friends. Now we have programs like Roll20. We have online conventions like Virtuacon. Now people are getting together with people they've never met before to play tabletop. And one of the big things that's come through this is, how do I judge players and how do I get a good cohesive group together? Because now I go on Roll20 as a GM and put out, hey, I'm playing 5th edition Pathfinder, who wants to play? And I get 23 people interested in joining, because there aren't enough DMs in the world. Need to be more DMs in the world. A lot of people go, how can I break this down to players that'll work well together? And the 8 types of fun is a method that you can use for this, for understanding your players beforehand. Again, it is difficult, really difficult, to understand what a player is going to be like based off their word. Because why? Players are terrible at understanding what they enjoy. I should just say everyone is terrible at understanding what they enjoy. It's really hard to be objectively self-reflective on what you do. But what you can, the 8 types of fun gives you a very core, and I have a nice little survey that I give out to people, to sort of pre-understand what they, what of the 8 types of fun they enjoy. But I really have the struggle of then, what do you do with that? If I know 100%, I've got these 4 players, and one is primarily discovery and expression, one is fellowship and narrative, one is sensation and fantasy, and the other is challenge and challenge, because that's all he cares about. Is that a bad group to have? No. Is it a good group to have? Not necessarily. I personally hold a mix of player types is really good. It's really good for a unit. And I have a hard time with people who really want to judge a group or judge players off, well, it's really going to be heavy role play, so I'm looking for role players, or hopefully after you've listened to this program, I'm looking for expression or narrative type players. But if you have only expression or narrative type players, then you're going to have a lot of things that you're used to that people aren't engaged in. You're not going to have a need for the discovery, and the stuff that you put in discovery wise is not going to, engage players. Stuff that you put in challenge wise might not engage them. I personally find that a good mix and working through the 8 types of fun really does a number when you're running a campaign. I personally, when I plan out, and again, in my last panel, I talked about planning out your story arcs. I try and look at within the story arc, have I engaged each of, and actually I say 7 of the 8 because I do not instinctively try and engage submission. Again, because I feel it's at odds. But if I do that, then any player of any play type is going to get enjoyment from my game because I'm not focusing on one thing. I'm focusing on the entire spectrum that is fun. So the other thing, of course, to really understand the hat and touch on is, and you've sort of heard me say it, is you need to consider multiple play styles. People rarely have just one of these that really ticks the, you know, that really that's their check mark that they need to do. Most people I found have 2, some people have 3. Again, me personally, it's narrative number 1, expression number 2. All day long. Everything else falls, it's 1, it's 2, everything else falls way below that. Different people are going to have different things, and these combinations are what make the overarching trends that we see. A character that enjoys narrative and enjoys sensation is going to really, really get into the story, and they're going to love every time there's handouts. They're going to read it from both a narrative standpoint of what am I learning and that textile I'm getting to feel it. When the music kicks, when the final ball starts, they are 100% engaged in that. But the fellowship and the discovery player, what he's going to be doing while all the narrative players focused on that is he's going to be going, is everyone going and doing the same thing, but also trying to direct people to go, well, we've been in this town for so long, but we need to stay together and we need to work together. He's going to find ways to try and direct the group subtly, you know, to go and explore more, because his 2 big things are discovery and fellowship. So based on different combinations, you're going to see players play different ways. And that is the big thing to understand about these 8 kinds of fun. That is the big thing that we are looking for at the end of the day, is how you really understand how your players will act, is understanding what of the 8 types of fun really appeal to them and what appeals to them less. Because again, as I said towards the beginning, every single person enjoys all 8 of these. There is no one that you're going to find that says, I hate fellowship, I hate people, I'm not going to be around people. There are people that might think that they do, and a lot of times it's because they haven't been presented a true enjoyment of that situation. You might have people that go, well, I don't really care for role play at all, and it's because they have not really got a chance to engage in an expression, in a narrative type of fun. Everyone enjoys all 8 of these, and you need to identify with your players which of these 8 that you do. So just in kind of closing here, I want to point out, this is, you know, this is different. This is different than most of what is taught out here. You know, again, this was a system developed specifically for gaming as a whole, not specifically tabletop, by Mark LeBlanc. And I really hold that this system is the definitive way of looking at players, because to call somebody, you know, they like role play, to say that they like combat, these are just nothing but, to say someone's a meta player, say someone's a power gamer, these are nothing but combinations of 8 types of fun. And if you understand the core basic components, you will truly understand the players. Okay, that's it for me. Then I've been, of course, Jim McClure. I'm the content director of the GM Academy on Roll20. This has been the 8 types of fun. I hope you all had a blast, and I hope you all enjoy the rest of Virtuacon.